Hello and welcome. I'm Sheila Doerfler from Luminescent Being, and today I have with me Robert Jackman. This is our second interview together, and I'm so excited because since our first interview a few months ago, Robert has finished his second book, and it came out just a few months ago. It's called Healing Your Wounded Relationship. Now, Robert is a psychotherapist, and his first book is called Healing Your Lost Inner Child. And there's also a workbook to go with that called Healing Your Lost Inner Child Companion Workbook. So welcome, Robert. It's so good to see you again. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
It's so good to see you as well, Sheila. I'm really excited to be here with you and to also talk about healing your wounded relationship and to really get into some of the dynamics of relationships with couples and understanding how our inner child, when it's not healed, will show up in our adult relationships over and over again.
Yes, yes. And this is a topic I am so passionate about. The inner child work that I've done has really transformed my life. So it's something I love sharing with others. So I started reading your book a few days ago. It came from Amazon, actually came early. Originally, it wasn't going to come for 3 or 4 weeks. So it came in time for our interview, and I was reading through a little bit more of it this morning while I had my coffee. Yeah. And so I wanted to start with the question that kept coming up for me while I was reading this morning, because as you talk about our woundedness in the context of, you know, our relationships and how we have these wounding bonds. My question was in terms of soulmates, because in our culture, there's so much pressure even that people feel when they are shopping for their soulmate and looking for their soulmate, seeking a soulmate. It really creates another level of expectation. And so how do we know with this soulmate thing, how do we know when we're projecting, when it's a wounded part that's making us believe that someone is our soulmate? And how do we know when it's real? How do we know when it's not real? And how do we know the difference?
Well, you're beginning with the big questions right away, Sheila. I love it. So I agree with you that people will go out looking or wanting to find their soulmate. I think that that's a tremendous amount of pressure they're putting on themselves because what they're saying is, I want to get it right. I mean, we all want to find mates and dating partners, relationship partners to that match us, that really coordinate well with us. One distinction I want to make is that when we set out to look for someone to date or marry, be in a committed relationship with, we're using our healed parts and our wounded parts. So we're bringing all of us to the table. And but what happens often is our wounded parts are sometimes louder than our healed parts. And so the wounded parts would be things like the false narratives. I don't feel very deserving, or I always put others first, or I should be in an abusive relationship because that's what I know. So all of these very confused kind of wounded aspects, people will subconsciously bring, and they'll start to basically attract someone who will fulfill that within them. So that's the root of the expression, hurt people find other hurt people. Because when we're, the wounded parts of us are loud, we're looking through a wounded lens. So we're not seeing someone else's wounding. We're seeing that, oh, okay, they talk to me like I'm used to, like how my mom or dad would put me down. Well, that's how he or she is talking to me. So it sounds familiar to them. So it's like looking into a relationship through a dirty window. Like you can see part of the view, but the dirt on the window is obscuring the view. You're not seeing it completely. And so a lot of times what will happen is that your friends or family will say, why are you dating him? Or what do you see in her?
Mhm.
So they're looking at it clearly, but in the relationship or in that dating context, the person isn't seeing any of that wounding because it's matching with their narrative. And that's what I call the synergistic wounded attraction, because they're in synergy. Their wounding is in synergy.
Right, right. So when we load up a relationship with some of these beliefs about soulmates and meant to be, we're meant to be, um, how do people know when, or is there a way to know when something is like built to last, or how do we distinguish, especially in early days? I have a lot of friends who are single, and
Mhm.
so they'll be going on dates, and they make their decisions pretty quickly. Usually it's like after one date you kind of
Mhm.
have a sense, but
Yep.
a couple of my friends have had more than one date with someone, and then maybe it's the wounds start resurfacing, or start driving the bus, right, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Mhm.
And then they end up, even early in a relationship, maybe the sex is good, but this person is already doing things that are so triggering.
Mhm.
But then they feel like there's chemistry, and there's like this push pull, and then we stop listening to our
Mhm.
inner. So how do we navigate life with, or dating, when we've got this constant thing, like it's not a battle, but it's these two aspects of ourself, where we've got the old wounds
Yep.
that get activated, and then we have what we want, like what we know as an adult,
Mhm.
and it's like you've got the subconscious running things, you've got what you want, but then it's happening in this relationship. So how do we know whether it's, yeah, like because it could be that person's
Yeah.
wounding, our wounding. It's like four people are
Yep.
in a relationship at once. You've got your inner child, you've got your adult,
Right.
you've got their inner child, you've got their adult, and then
That's right.
probably their parents as well. Like it's like, it's not two people in a relationship. It's it's
Right.
like, you've got all the family members.
Well, this is where it comes down to discernment, because early parts of dating life is super exciting and it's euphoric, and there's just a lot of energy around it. And what tends to happen is people tend to overlook red flags at the beginning because they're in this sort of euphoric pink glow. They're just loving it, and of course everyone's on their best behavior at that point. So they're trying really hard to put their best foot forward, that sort of thing. I'm working with a lady right now, and I talk about it in the book. where I said, okay, so you're dating this guy. He sounds really nice. And I said, I just want you to do just a little process where it's a test in a way, but I think it's a fair test. And what I asked her to do, I said, just say a small no. Let's say it comes out naturally, where he would say, let's go have Mexican food tonight. And I just want you to practice and say, well, no, I really don't want that. I'd like something else. So what you're looking for in the dating partner is respect coming from him or her as to what you're saying when you say no. So if the dating partner is like, well, no, I really want to go here, and they try to talk us out of our no, that's a huge clue right there, because that's showing you that they're not respecting you and that they're talking over you. They want you to just sort of submit to them. That's a big red flag right there. You know, it's a simple thing to do, but it speaks volumes. And she actually said, after she did that, she said, what I'm noticing is that when I say other things, not necessarily in a testing sort of way, but when she says other things, as far as like, well, let's do this instead, or I kind of like that, or that he's very respectful. So what that's doing for her, because she had been in an abusive relationship before, so what that's doing for her is helping her to discern within herself, like, okay, I'm setting a boundary and he's respecting that. So whether or not, going back to your original question, whether or not they're soulmates, I don't know. But a lot of people who start dating someone, it feels so good that it feels like they're soulmates. It feels wonderful, but it's really, you have to do way more discernment, have many more discussions. You have to really check in with yourself, with your gut reaction, and say, how does this feel? Does it feel reciprocal? Does it feel like he or she listens to me? Do I feel honored? And I go through that process in the book as well, as far as just a checklist in a way. Like, this is what a loving connection should feel like and sound like.
Right.
And if those things are not being met, then it's like, well, you know, he or she might be really cute and fun, and you really want them to be your soulmate. But if they're not really meeting your needs fully, then it's probably just maybe a fun time.
Right. Right. Or just good sex. Right.
Right.
Which, can, people can, I mean, when I was younger, I think that there were definitely men in college that I stayed with longer than I should have for that reason.
Yep. Yep.
So,
And we all do those. We all make those choices. I referenced how early in my young adult life, I would meet up with people who were really narcissistic, but I didn't see them that way. So my wounding, my codependent wounding, wasn't recognizing their narcissism.
right.
I just thought, oh, this person, they're strong, they know what they want, they speak their mind. So that's how my wounding interpreted all of their wounding.
Right.
And it wasn't until I started to heal, do my own work, that I'm like, oh my gosh, I mean, I saw how much I was giving my power over in these relationships.
Right. Right. Yeah. And there was something that you said a few minutes ago that made me think of something else that I had a question about this morning, when you were talking about at the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
You are saying that ideally, if you're picking up this book, that it would be great for both partners in the relationship to work on the book simultaneously, because there's exercises and
Mhm.
like self-inquiry exercises in each of the segments of the book.
Right.
But you also talk very early in the book that if your partner is not
Mhm.
willing, can you speak into that? If you're the person in the relationship who
Yeah.
is focused on growth and healing, but maybe your partner isn't there yet, how do we navigate that in a relationship? Still getting our needs met, but not pushing.
I think that's a great question, and yes, I really wanted to bring that out in the book because, as a psychotherapist, having worked with individuals and couples for over 2 decades, I've heard lots of stories. A lot of times, individuals will come in and they'll say, "I want to work on my relationship," and and I understand what they mean, but I'll say, okay, well, it's going to be hard for just you to work on the relationship, but we can do it. And so that's why I put it in the book, to really bring that out, because the reality is, if just one of you is working, doing this work and going within, and starting right in chapter 1, I'm asking, what does your ideal relationship look like? And really getting you to sort of dream big and say, gosh, what do I need? What would be great if I had this in my relationship? So it's beginning that conversation within you,
Mhm.
where you're saying, okay, this is what I'd like to get to. How can I get there? And that really is, the book takes you through this whole process of discovery. So it is possible to read the book on your own, to do the exercises on your own. You're going to be discovering a lot. Uh, my books are have been described as sort of therapy in book form, meaning that a lot of people feel like, I feel like I'm going to a therapy appointment when I open your book, because I'm asking everything that I would ask in a therapy appointment in the book. So I'm taking you through that process. So what I invite people to do is, if they're the only ones doing the work, they're going to be discovering a lot about themselves. They will then be able to go back to their partner and say, this is what I'm understanding about myself, and I'd like to have a conversation with you about what my needs are and how I'd like our relationship to look. So it's really going to help you to bring in the language to really upgrade your relationship, the communication in your relationship. That's what it will do. And of course, if couples are working on this together, which is what I have them do in session, basically I have them follow the chapters and the exercises. Um, it's amazing how deep they can go very quickly with each other, because we're kind of cutting out a lot of noise, and I'm asking very specific questions for them. And so, and I'm encouraging them to do these exercises on their own, and
Mhm.
then come into session and say, and then we're talking about, well, how did that go?
Yeah. Yeah. So in all the years that you've been practicing, is there a particular prerequisite, or is there a quality to partnerships where people, because how am I going to word this? So when you have a couple that's willing,
Hmm.
and two people can be in two very different places. Like, I think
Yeah.
a lot of times it's one partner over the other really feels compelled to get outside help, and the
Yep.
other person comes along with maybe there's a broad spectrum of being dragged to being willing to
Yes.
being open. Like, there's a spectrum to the person that is being encouraged, guided.
Right.
How do you have any tips or insights to share around having that first conversation with your partner, if you're the one realizing that you need outside help, that maybe you start working with the exercises in the book and you're like,
Mhm.
I can't do this alone. I need more support.
I think that that's a great question, and I um, believe that what it comes down to is what I call intentional communication and heartfelt communication. Uh, Three things that I'm looking for within a relationship when couples come in is their level of trust, love, and respect. And respect is probably the most important aspect that I'm looking for, because if they have respect for each other, I can really help them rekindle love and help them repair trust issues. So uh, if one really wants to come in and they're trying to cajole the other partner to do this, um, I believe that the more time they spend on working on their communication, and I give examples of how to start difficult conversations,
Oh, good.
such as this is really hard for me to say, but I need to tell you this, or I've given this a lot of careful thought, and I really want to share this with you, or is this a good, I'd really love to sit down and talk with you, when would be a good time for us to talk? So what each of those phrases are doing is letting your partner know that you're really spending time with this and this is important to you. And hopefully the partner will say, okay, this is important to him or her, and how can I step up?
Great, great. In your practice, have you ever worked with couples where it's clear that they, I don't know how to word this.
Are not good for each other?
Where it's clear they just should not be together, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe either the trust is not there, or the respect, or the love, and that it's sort of a deal breaker. Is there ever a time that you know that this work is not going to be enough?
Well, I'm going to answer that in two ways. So I'll say first, answer your question directly. Um, yes, I do believe that some couples are beyond where the relationship has stretched them beyond, like a rubber band you've pulled too hard. They can't get back to their shape anymore because of betrayals, because of just endless fighting. One of the couples that I talk about in the book, because I have 9 synergistically wounded attractions, archetypes that I talk about. And one of the couples, I don't want to give it away, but one of the couples, they don't work out. And they don't work out because it had just gone on for so long, and they really hadn't tried to repair the relationship. And it just got uh, too hard for them. Um, so yeah, I mean that does happen, of course, in session. It's not for me or any therapist to say you guys should split up or whatever. That's for the couple to kind of come to that conclusion. But I believe if they're really trying and they're being honest with themselves and each other, what I've seen is that they come to that conclusion in a sad way, meaning that it's a sad situation, but they're being very gentle with each other. And that shows a lot of humility. And it shows that they really have done a lot of work to get to this point of saying, okay, we tried our best. So the second point I want to make is at the beginning of the book, you might have seen this, but I have a section called a word of caution on
Yes.
page 6,
Mhm.
right? And so that the word of caution is really important because I wanted to make sure that anyone who's in an abusive domestic violence or highly manipulative relationship, this work that I'm describing is not for them, because the risk is, if they started to try to do these things with their partners who are very controlling and manipulative, a lot of times they're just going to get louder, bigger, and it could get into a very dangerous situation. So
Yeah.
I wanted to make that distinction up front for folks.
Yeah, no, that was part of what I was rereading this morning. When I was thinking of questions this morning, that you put that right in the beginning of the book is so important. When I had just graduated university, one of my first paid jobs was working at a battered women's shelter. And so it's a very real reality that many people find themselves in, and challenging that.
It really is. And of course, I'm not saying if someone is in a type of relationship that there's no hope for them, but what I'm saying is for them to get professional help to help them navigate that relationship, because those are very complicated relationships.
Yeah.
That you're not going to find the answer to those in a book. You really need someone to help you guide you through that process.
Right.
So,
and also when your physical body is, when you're physically in danger by upsetting the apple cart, right?
Right.
You need to be more cautious about these exercises. And yeah, definitely.
Well, it's about being aware of how your wounding chose a person who was narcissistic or manipulative or abusive, and being very gentle with yourself. And I have resources in the book. I list some resources that people can use to go to find help, to help them through that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. This brings me to the next question. We touched on this a little already, but can you go more in depth about the red flags? Why is it so hard to recognize the red flags in our own relationships? And when we're observing friends in their relationships from the outside, it always seems obvious to us, but we have this blind spot with our own. And I mentioned to you that I have worked a lot on red flags, just generally for me in the last year, things that have come up around my business, and starting to realize I had this pattern from my own woundedness, where I ignore red flags, from the beginning, and with usually disastrous results. So it's an issue that I've worked on myself a lot in the last 12 months. So could you speak into red flags?
Great question. Red flags are all around us. But a wound, like I said before, a wounded heart cannot see a red flag. And so let's describe what red flags are. They can be when people don't treat us well, when people talk down to us. So that would be a red flag that, is coming from outside of us. A red flag within us would be an example of, I keep on doing self-sabotaging things. I keep on ignoring my boundaries. I'm not honoring myself. I'm pretending a lot. I think that probably is what happens with a lot of folks, is they go into this sort of pretending mode, like, oh, well, I didn't really see that. Or they go into a storytelling mode where it's like, oh, well, he's just having a bad day. That's why he yelled at me. Or well, that's just how she is. She shuts down and she avoids me. That's just what she does. So we tend to kind of write them off as personality quirks.
Yeah.
We tend to minimize them. And so that's such a codependent thing, right? Where we're minimizing things and we're sort of twisting ourselves into a pretzel to fit into someone else's world.
Yeah.
The key part to all of that, as far as the healing of it, is really boundary setting. And that's why in my first book, chapters 4 and 6 are all about boundaries. And then in this book, I also have a chapter on boundaries, because that's really how we can best determine if we're seeing ourself and our relationships correctly. So a boundary would be just checking in with yourself and say, okay, I was just with this person, and how do I feel? Do I feel like that was good, that was reciprocal? Do I feel filled up, or do I feel depleted? So if you're coming away feeling depleted, then you're probably either giving your power away, or they're taking your power, but you're giving it up. So that would be just a short little example. But if your viewers can tap into just that gut reaction of how do I feel when I'm with this person? How do I feel after I've been with this person? Just do that check-in to
Mhm.
really know, like, okay, does this feel good or not? And to be honest with yourself, a lot of times we want these relationships to work so much that we ignore the red flags, so that person will fit into our narrative, so that they will fit into the story, this once upon a time fairy tale story that we're creating for the soulmate story, because we want it to work so badly. But that's, of course, the red flags that we're overlooking now are going to be huge, in a short amount of time. And those are the things that people will come in and they'll say, well, I hate how he just lays around, is not motivated. And I'm like, okay, well, was he like that when you met him? And they'll be like, well, pretty much. I'm like, okay, so this is this is how he is. So, it's whatever they were doing to sort of ignore that that's how he was, and they didn't want to see him that way, or they felt that they could change him.
Right. Oh, that's
Which
a
is
big one. That is a big one. Yes. Yes.
right.
Um, that is so huge. I can't tell you, like in my especially my college years,
Hmm.
thinking that, you know, yeah, that like you basically go in with this freaking hidden agenda, right?
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
this is another way where, like good chemistry, good sex can really be a detriment, because it's like your your pleasure centers are completely going, oh yeah, but then like the other part of you is like, yeah, I'm just going to change the rest of the shit that's not working.
I know, but sometimes that works out, meaning that let's say if in our example the guy doesn't have a lot of motivation, and the partner comes in and says, well, I can change him, to like I can cajole him into doing more. I can, but it may not work. Or the guy might be like, well, this is like, okay, I'm just going to let my partner kind of boss me around.
Yeah.
So in that way, the wounding might work. It's not functional. There are more wounded parts than healed parts in that relationship. But
Right.
that's the synergy that they've gotten to, that they're sort of, that's how they're making it work.
Right, exactly. And it's occasionally I'll meet a couple where they might even be in their 70s, and
Yeah.
you can see that like this person, you know, has been in that role of,
Yeah.
you know, taking care of that person, so that you have this 70-year-old man that's still behaving like a little boy.
Yeah.
And the partner, the wife is, you know, setting up his microphone for, you know, the computer, and making sure everything's just so, right. It's,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, it's really, it, like, there's a sculpture. Just the other day, there was a photo in my feed on one of my social medias, and it's a famous sculpture. I've seen it before. I think it was in a Burning Man
Oh,
sculpture, and it's got
yeah.
statues. It's the shell is the size of an adult body, and it's just like a wired figure, and then
Yeah.
inside is the solid little children, and they're sitting in a, with their knees up, with their
Yeah.
backs to each other, and the inner
Yeah.
children inside the sculpture are facing each other, but
Mhm.
they're trapped in these cages of the adult bodies. And like, you
That's
popped
right.
into my mind when I saw that the other day.
Well, that, yeah, I've seen that, and that is from Burning Man. That was a sculpture out on the playa, um, in Burning Man, and it so beautifully illustrates that most of us have these a wounded inner child inside of us that, when triggered, will rush in front of us and go through all these protective measures to help us navigate these situations, just like that part did in childhood, and now that part's doing the same in adulthood. And of course, those are the red flags, you know. So when that wounding comes forward, that's a big red flag. When someone is throwing a temper tantrum, when someone is shutting down and isolating, those are all wounded responses. That is an inner child wounded response that's happening right there. And in the book, I also I try to give lots of examples, because that's how we learn, because we can relate to these examples. And there's a story about a couple named Jason and Rachel. And so when Jason gets triggered, he will isolate, he'll go and play video games, he will drink alcohol to kind of self-soothe, and he'll avoid Rachel. And what happens with Rachel, her inner child wounding, is she gets freaked out, because she goes into this, like, he's ignoring me, he's not listening to me. I feel, so she starts to take all of his actions very personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so essentially what you have there is their inner children are having this kind of this fight. You know,
Right.
it's no longer the adult self, it's the inner child self. And so I
Right.
describe how I took them through this process of really helping them understand that that's how their inner child, the wounded part of them, was kept on stepping forward. And for Jason to realize that he learned to do that as a teenage boy with his mom. So
Mhm.
mom would try to get him to talk and open up, and he just wanted to shut down and isolate and be his depressed self. And of course, mom just kept on kind of coming after him the same way that Rachel does now with him. You know,
Right.
so that's how we create. But Jason and Rachel might have felt like they were soulmates at the beginning, because they understood each other subconsciously, and so that brought them together, and then they were playing out this wounding. So what I take people through is called STAR reset, and it's stop, think, act, reset, and repair. And the whole, it's a process that I explain in the book, but it really is about when when couples are getting into that kind of back and forth, that dysfunctional back and forth. It's for one of you to say, hey, we need a reset here, we need to start over, let's begin this conversation again. This is what I'm trying to say. And that's what I teach couples who see me. And that's what I also, for Jason and Rachel, you'll read this is how they work through that with their communication, with their intentional communication. So yeah, Jason still needs to isolate, but he's now telling Rachel, this is what's going on with me. I'm having a bad day. I just need to play video games, instead of him just sort of like, slinking off, not
Right.
telling her anything. And then she gets all activated and real big.
Right, right. Yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of consciously communicating, right? It changes the
Totally.
whole context.
Totally. Yeah, because then they're bringing that up in that conversation out in the open between them. And they're saying, this is what's going on with me right now, through that intentional communication, through being heartfelt, open-hearted. They're saying, this is what's happening, because it's normal to have feelings. It's normal to have a bad day. It's normal to need to do your own thing sometimes, but it's for couples to begin this conversation, instead of just sort of going off and doing something and hoping the other partner can mind read and figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. The mind reading thing is huge. It's and a lot of this it's not modeled by our parents usually.
No.
I mean, I would say it's a very small percentage of people that I know had
Right.
parents with a functional relationship. And so it's not modeled for us. And then the media, like meaning our movies, our romantic movies,
Yeah.
fuel these dysfunctional relationships, this woundedness as romantic, right? So
Right. That's a really good point. That you make a really good point with that. Yeah, they sort of romanticize that dysfunctionality, but of course, by the end of the movie, they're back together and everything's wonderful. They don't really show all the pain and suffering that couple had to go through, all the conversations, all the work that most couples have to do to really repair that.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, like I think this happened with getting married for me, but it also happened when I had my son, that
Mhm.
there's so much romanticizing of these things, these milestones in our life, right? They're going to make us happy. They're going to, right? We load them up with lots of expectations, or, we might have spent our whole childhood fantasizing about the perfect wedding, or the,
Yeah.
right, the perfect mate, perfect house with the perfect children, right? Like, and that gets fed by the world around us. But
Right.
what's interesting is, both with marriage and with being a parent, is that the wedding day is just the beginning of this relationship you need to navigate, right? Like,
Yeah.
this container that you're creating to grow
Right.
yourselves, right? But
Right.
but marriage and weddings are not put in that context. Like if people had that awareness, I don't think people would probably get married or even start relationships. It's like, we come to that much later, when we realize, like, these are containers for self-actualization. Like, that's ultimately what their function and their role is for our soul, for our, for coming here and incarnating, right, into this body in this life. That is what our relationships are meant to do. They're a container for growth. And then same with motherhood. Like, you have all this stuff that happens when you're pregnant, and this romanticizing of what it's going to be like after you have the baby, and then the reality of being a mother. It's like the most demanding thing, of being a parent, period.
Parent. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the most demanding thing, and you don't get a break from it because, you know, it's like there's life before, there's life after. And so it's like our culture reduces these things, parenthood and relationships, they reduce it down to the happy ending, right? Like once you have this thing, it's, you know, it's like the end, right? It's like, you know,
Right.
fade to black.
Right. Right.
You know, fade to black.
Right.
We know that like it's all, you know, fairy tale ending, but the reality is that you know, that's when the work just begins.
It just begins. And so when we walk down the aisle of our commitment ceremonies, our weddings, we're carrying all of our baggage with us.
I know.
It's tucked away, and it's not like big and loud, but all of that is there, and it's just waiting to be unpacked at some point within that relationship.
Yeah.
So at some point, that baggage is going to come out. It might be early on, it might be 5-10 years later, but then it's like, because that's how we work through issues. And, you know, from a kind of a bigger soul perspective, going back to soulmate, that I believe that everything happens for a reason. I believe that I specifically was just reenacting my adult child of alcoholic wounding when I was attracting those narcissists to me. So that's how my soul was trying to learn and trying to heal and trying to grow, but it was all in a subconscious way. So I was attracting these narcissistically wounded folks, and I was like, you know, giving them all this power. But I knew I wasn't happy, and I knew I wasn't being treated well, but I just knew what I knew.
Right.
So it wasn't right. So at some level, my soul was, you know, I was playing out these dramas,
Yeah.
so my soul could learn a lesson. You know, so it's, you know, it's like, yeah, we say soulmate because, and we're thinking that it's all sunshine and roses and happily ever after. But in many ways, we're choosing people to come into our life to learn lessons from. Hopefully we're growing. Hopefully we can grow with them and expand with that. We can expand together in consciousness so that we feel open-hearted, we feel safe, that we're each creating a safe container for the other just to be themselves. That, I mean, that's the ultimate, but that takes a lot of work.
Yeah. work being the key word there. Oh, so that makes me, another question just popped into my head as you said that. So where does playtime, having fun, moving away from all the seriousness of the work of relationships, where do you either counsel couples or, you know, where does play and having fun and connecting in that way, for someone like me who's often analyzing everything, which is part of my way my woundedness shows up,
Right.
I can get so in my head about wanting to fix things, that I forget to have fun, like both just day to day, but in, you know, in my relationships as well.
The more we work on ourselves and recognize and check in with ourselves and have good internal boundaries, the more we begin to know, okay, I need to go to yoga. I need to go and to the gym. I need to go and meet a friend for coffee. I need to sit on the floor with, you know, I'll play with my stones. I'll make grids with my stones. And for me, that's playtime. But I have to, much like you, I have to consciously say, I need to do this now, because otherwise I'm just doing to-do lists.
Yeah.
I'm just caught up in the to-do list, and it's not until I say, no, I really want to do this today. I want to sit and make some grids and, you know, pray for the planet, sort of thing. For me, that's a great playtime. But what I've noticed is, in working with couples, I'll say, so what do you guys do for fun? And they will blankly stare at me. They will they will stare at each other, and they're like, well, we do this or that. You know, they they really can't, most couples really cannot answer how they play. A lot of times they'll equate it to sex, and they'll
Right.
say, well, we have sex once a month, you know, but even they're describing it, they're telling me that but they're not like excited about it. Yeah, it's almost like, you know, like, okay, check. So, especially I find couples who are parents,
Mhm.
they're very invested in the management of the household. They're very invested in the parenting. So they become really good co-managers.
Mhm.
But the playmate part of them has really, you know, gone dormant.
So do you
So
have,
that's where it's about expressing your needs,
mhm,
and it's really checking in and say, okay, what's missing? What do I need? What you know, I want to have fun. I want to feel playful again. I want us to go on dates again. And that's where it's having these heartfelt talks. It's with intentional communication. It's saying, I really need this. I know this is a need for me.
great, great. Well, I have so many more questions for you, but we're coming to the end of our time together. So I think we need to have a follow-up to this, because there's you're dropping so much wisdom and insights and just gems, like gold nuggets. So it's all good.
Well, thank you. I mean, of course, you and I could talk about anything, I think, forever. I want to, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to read um, what I came up with. I really wanted to include it in the book, and it really speaks to a big part of my journey.
Great.
Now I know what others have told me, that I'm a good person, that I'm worthy of kindness and love. I have put down the illusions of the false narrative that I held so dear for way too long. In my new limitless landscape, with my love beaming with pride by my side, I now embrace the shiny, healed parts of me and my hard-won medals of accomplishment, valor, surrender, and love.
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
So that's just a perfect place to leave it. So thank you so much, Robert. And again, just before we go, Robert's new book, Healing Your Wounded Relationship by Robert Jackman.
And
It's
it's available on Amazon.
great, great. I was just going to say that. And also his first book and the workbook, those are called Healing Your Lost Inner Child and Healing Your Lost Inner Child Companion Workbook, all available on Amazon. Robert, this has been such a great conversation, and I really look forward to our next one.
Me too. Thank you so much, Sheila.
Right. Bye for now.
Bye.